Thomas. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the East Gippsland Shire Council meeting for Tuesday, the 11th of December 2018. East Gippsland Shire Council live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing the council will have their image, comments or submissions recorded. Please ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. On behalf of Council, I would like to acknowledge the Gunai-Kurnai people, the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, and pay our respects to their elders both past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge former mayors in the gallery, Ms Mendy Yuri and Mr Peter Neal. Item 1.2, apologies, Mr CEO.
Madam Mayor, I have two apologies, one from Councillor Reeves, having previously sought leave of absence, and one from Councillor Toohey, who is unwell and unable to attend today.
Thank you. Item 1.3, declaration of conflict of interest.
Madam Mayor, I have received no conflicts of interest declarations.
Thank you. Item 1.4, confirmation of minutes. We have two lots to move: that the minutes of the special council meeting to consider annual report 2017-18 held on Tuesday 9th of October 2018 be confirmed. Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Councillor White. And that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on Tuesday 13th of November 2018 be confirmed. Councillor Peltz. Thanks, Councillor White. 1.5, the next meeting will be ordinary council meeting Tuesday the 5th of February 2019 to be held at the Corporate Centre, 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale, commencing at 6 p.m. Item 1.6, requests for leave of absence. Right. Okay, 1.7, a public question time, Mr CEO.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have 4 questions have been submitted tonight. 2 from Mr Borgelt. It would be my recommendation to Council to not hear those questions tonight, in line with our policy, in that they cover items that have already been significantly dealt with at Council and through formal responses as part of Council's response to Mr Borgelt. So I would put that those questions are not put to Council tonight.
That's rubbish.
The
Excuse me, Mr Borgelt, please refrain from calling out. Please refrain. Please refrain.
The second question's...
Never answered.
The second question, we have two...
Please, Mr Borgelt, refrain.
Don't look at me like that, Mr Holden.
I have two questions from Mr Hugo, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Calbar Resources, and I would invite him to ask his questions if he so desires.
Excuse me, I would ask the gallery to please be quiet.
Calbar Resources.
Otherwise, you will be removed from the gallery.
Really? I will be removed for why?
If you continue to call out.
Well, let me ask the questions.
The CEO has advised that those questions have been answered.
How would he know? He's never been here.
Mr Borgelt, can you please sit down?
He's got crook information as normal.
Mr Hugo.
Good evening, can you hear me? Councillor, I have 2 questions. The first question is that given the environmental effects statement process undertaken in accordance with state legislation and overseen by the state government agencies and participated in by council officers is yet to be concluded, and that the environmental effects statement is yet to be finalised and published. Does Council agree that the passing of a resolution now to oppose the fingerboards project would reasonably be perceived as premature, preconceived, biased, and/or contrary to the principles of good governance, natural justice, and due process? And have councillors considered the potential legal consequences of such a decision?
Thank you. I would like to remind the gallery that you will be removed if you cannot be respectful. Mr. Holton. Oh, no, or Mr. CEO. Mr. Holton.
I believe that is a question that is probably better answered by the elected leaders. The legal position in relation to any motion moved here in respect of the EES is not, I think, how can I say, there are, I don't believe there are, I'll have to take that one on notice, I'm sorry, because I can't answer the legal parameters of it.
Thank you, Mr. Holton. Mr. CEO, do you have something to add?
If I could add, Madam Mayor, I think in fact those questions that have been raised here are actually going to be considered by Council as part of the notices of motion in terms of the potential legal consequences, which has been raised in the second notice of motion, so I think those will be answered in the debate that follows about those notices of motion.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. Mr. Hugo, your second.
My second question, Council, is given the Councillor's obligation under the Local Governments Act and the Councillor's Code of Conduct to provide good governance on behalf of the whole of the East Gippsland community and take all reasonable steps to ensure that the information upon which decisions or actions are based are factually correct. What steps have councillors taken to inform themselves comprehensively of the facts regarding the impacts of the fingerboards project, including seeking an independent expert advice or state government agency advice regarding the potential environmental, social, and economic impacts of the proposed project? And would the fact that an independent market research which indicates that over 60% of the East Gippsland community is yet to reach a conclusion on the results of the project to be of relevance to the Council's consideration this evening?
Thank you. Mr. Holton.
All of those matters would be covered in the environmental effects statement, which would be provided to Council as part of the process, and Council will have the opportunity to make their submission on the back of any of the matters that do come forward in the environmental effects statement.
Thank you, Mr. Holton. Thank you, Mr. Hugo. Next question.
Madam Mayor, if I may, I'd like to move...
oh, hang on, we've still got some more.
Oh, we've got more questions?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I missed this one, so there was, in fact, 5 questions. So it's from Peter Weir. Neil, sorry. Trying to read the... will the Mayor... Would you like to read your question? That'd be great.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. Will the Mayor when will the Mayor tell the community what it intends and when explain how council will handle the outburst by a councillor at the council election evening?
Thank you, Mr Neal. As most of you would be aware, we are currently undertaking a councillor code of conduct, and following that process, we have moved into the external mediation phase, and that is currently underway. So once that has been resolved, that will be made known. Anything further? No. Thank you. Next item, Councillor Peltz. Did you want to move?
I'd like to move that we bring item number 2.1 forward in the minutes,
Thank you.
so that we can hear what these lovely people have all come for. We'll bring it forward for you so that you can get it over and done with. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Okay, there's... Pardon? Oh, yeah. Put the motion to you. All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Okay, motion carried. There's quite a number of speakers to speak to the notices of motion, so I will ask that you have 5 minutes and keep it to that time frame, and I'll just call you up as I have the order of paperwork. So the first on my list is Miss Debbie Carruthers to speak to item 2.1.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Debbie Carruthers, Coordinator of Gasfield Free Bairnsdale. 2 years ago, the East Gippsland Shire Council unanimously voted to ban fracking in response to mining licences here and deep concerns raised by the community. We're extremely grateful to the Council for that action. Taking this position sent a strong message to the Victorian Government. In addition to other actions taken across the state, it resulted in the government legislating for a permanent ban on fracking. This is an example of council influencing an outcome before a government decision was made. A gas company had been speaking with council, but legal opinions weren't sought then. The reason why the fracking ban was legislated was to protect agriculture. Agriculture needs our protection again from another major threat. This proposed open-cut 11 square kilometre mineral sands mine within 500 metres of our food bowl and 350 metres from the heritage-listed Mitchell River that irrigates those crops, supplies us with our drinking water, is where we fish and tourists come to our Gippsland Lakes protected Ramsar wetlands. We've been told to wait for the results of the EES. However, that process is widely recognised as being flawed. The 50 recommendations made to fundamentally overhaul it have never been implemented, following a parliamentary inquiry in 2011 and an Auditor General's report in 2017. Our local member, Tim Bull, was a member of that inquiry. So he and anyone else who advocates that we wait for those results knows the EES process is like Swiss cheese, with far too many holes in it. To ask the community to wait and have confidence in it is laughable. EEO processes are initiated when there are significant environmental issues, so this is flagging major warning bells about this mine. This is not a sand mine, as people were initially saying. There are acknowledged radioactive, hazardous, and highly toxic substances involved. This is an inappropriate area for a mine. The terrain is hilly, full of steep gullies, and is subject to east coast lows, with very heavy rainfall, sometimes 100 millimetres in a day. These gullies flow directly into the Mitchell River. There are regulation failures. Remember the Hazelwood mine fire and contamination events of aquifers, lakes, and rivers by mining companies. Bonds paid by mining companies only cover rehabilitation of the area mined, not disasters arising from them. Based on government data, the Australia Institute reported in July 2017 that only one of 150 mines operating in Victoria has ever been fully rehabilitated. So based on that track record, rehabilitation will never happen, even though mining companies say it will. CalBar has acknowledged they have no experience as a mining company, which is a very scary prospect when you consider the highly hazardous and radioactive substances involved. Even the big experienced mining companies such as BHP get it wrong. Remember Octetti. A CalBar staff member told me planning for their 60-hectare tailings dam is for a 1 in 100-year event. With climate change, major weather events are likely to be more frequent and could happen many times during this mine's 20-year lifespan. One thing we can be sure, Mother Nature isn't going to be reading the EES. This mine shouldn't go ahead. The risks are too great and they all can't be controlled. There's no social license for the mine to proceed, with 82% of the directly impacted landholders saying they don't want the mine on their land. Nearly 3,000 people have signed a petition to the Legislative Assembly. I have them here. And nearly 200 business owners and community group leaders have signed the petition to this council to state their opposition to the mine. There are another two petitions to the Premier and the Treasurer on change.org with over 2,000 signatures. I ask the Council whether any motion has attracted so many signatures. The Victorian Government needs to listen to the concerns of the people who live in, know the area and have to live with the consequences. We are here tonight to express our deep concern and ask that you act in the interest of ratepayers by sending a clear message now to the Minister for Planning, based in Melbourne, who will decide the fate of this mine. Before you were elected as a councillor, you were asked for your position on the mine. It is reassuring to see the majority of you stated you were concerned about it and did not support the mine going ahead. We respectfully ask you to stand true to what you said.
Thank you, Mrs.
We're
Carruthers.
grateful to Councillor Roberts for putting forward this motion, and we ask you to show your leadership on this, because the community will only have 30 days to respond to the over 1,000 pages of the EES document when it's released to the public. Let's hope no one's on leave at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Carruthers. Miss Sharon Clerk. Sharon Clerk, please come to the microphone. Sharon Clerk, please come to the microphone.
Please just bear with me for...
I'll remind you that you only have 5 minutes to speak.
It goes well under 5 minutes, so we will be ready to go.
Yep, we've got a lot to get through.
We
So.
have, and this will not take very long at all. Is
Clerk.
this on? Yes. Is this on? Yes. My name is Sharon Clerk and I live in Glenaladale. I'm here tonight to speak about lifestyle, why I and many others chose to live in Glenaladale. We are not classed by CalBar Resources as affected landholders. However, we will suffer just as others in the mine footprint will. We also pay rates, unlike CalBar Resources, on any land they own in East Gippsland. This is water taken from my tap at Glenaladale. Clean, fresh water, tank water, no chemicals, no additives. Clean, fresh rainwater that has been independently tested, as many others, both in Glenaladale and beyond, have had done. This is a sample taken from a core sample from Glenaladale. The rest sits in an independent laboratory in Melbourne undergoing rigorous testing for all those nasties CalBar say won't be in the dust, seep into the river, blow across the Lindeno Valley, our vegetables, and the Wood Glen storage, supplying 19,400 households and 2,350 commercial premises across East Gippsland. I've been advised to use gloves and a mask when opening this container. Monazite, thorium, silicon, just to name a few. So let's just put a little bit of monazite, a little bit of thorium, a little bit of silicon. Mind that goes into your lungs, just to name a few. If a mineral sands mine was to proceed at Glenalladale, this may be what most East Gippslanders will drink when they turn on the tap. Not only from drinking water collected from roofs in Glenalladale, but all those that rely on our town water supply. We come to Glenalladale and East Gippsland for a lifestyle. Clean drinking water, green vegetables, fresh air, peace, tranquility, pristine rivers, the magnificent Gippsland lakes. Many of us are not born and bred here, but perhaps in many instances appreciate far more what East Gippsland has to offer and what East Gippsland has to lose if Kelbo Resources have their way. I ask you, the councillors of East Gippsland, would you be happy drinking this tainted glass of water, not really knowing what you are drinking? I suppose in reality it won't really matter to any of us if a mineral sands mine is supported by East Gippsland Shire. Just don't drink the water. After all, it's just a lifestyle, but it's our bloody lifestyle. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Ms Clerk. Mr Alan Solomon, can you please come up? Just a reminder, that's 5 minutes.
I acknowledge and pay my respects to the Gunai Kurnai people that lived on this land for many generations. I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present, and I acknowledge young future Gunai people today. My name is Alan Solomon, and I oppose against the mineral sand mine in Glenalladale. I stand here today to represent my local community. This is one key, there is one key word that I want to acknowledge, that is respect. If you say the welcome to country, you need to respect it. Saying those words, welcome to country, needs respect it. All Gunai people and our culture. You need to respect the history, the land, the environment where we live, and the stories that are related in this area. I want everyone to know what I say every time I hear and go out to Glenalladale. I look into the directions where camp areas are, and imagine tribes living there. Now, imagine men on horses coming down the directions of Bryagalong. I only had one thing in their mind, is wipe out all tribes in that area. Chasing the tribes through Glenalladale to Skull Creek. Hundreds of remains was found in Skull Creek. This is why I stand here today, a part of a terrible history that did happen and cannot be forgotten. or can't be cleared by a mind. Once it's gone, it is gone. It breaks my heart to see a mine go through and destroy that. That was a bad history. We can't destroy it. No one can ignore what has happened. I just want everyone to show respect to the Gunai Kurnai people of this land. Respect. There should be a memorial out there, not a mind.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. Mr. Victor Hugo. Thank you. It's just a reminder of 5 minutes speaking time.
Sorry. There we are. Good evening. My name is Dr. Victor Hugo and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Kalbar Resources Limited. I have asked to make a submission to Council regarding the motions 3/2018 and 4/2018. Let me stress from the onset that it's Kalbar's strong preference to consult and work with all stakeholders regarding any concerns they may have about the environment and social impacts of the Fingerboards project. And it's my intention tonight to assist Council to make a decision consistent with the Council's own code of conduct and the principles of good governance. I'm sure that we're all aware that the project has been assessed by the Victorian Government Minister for Planning and that there is an EES process currently being undertaken in accordance with the Environmental Effects Act. The project can only go ahead after assessment by government agencies and regulators based on factual evidence.
Please desist from calling out.
And only after the input of the community through an extensive public consultation process which involves an independent public inquiry hearing in which Council and community submitters will be entitled to participate. 20 technical studies are nearing completion, and the ES report, which will include these studies, is expected to be lodged with the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning in the first quarter of 2019. That's just several months away. All of these studies have been prepared under the guidance of a review under the guidance and review of a technical reference group, which includes the East Gippsland Shire Council. And at the request of the Shire Council and others, 3 of the major specialist studies, water, rehabilitation and air quality, will undergo independent peer review as part of the EES process. The purpose of these studies is to identify the potential environmental, social and economic aspects or impacts of the project. And this information, in some instances, is helping us refine the project's scope and develop mitigation and management measures to limit the project's impact on the environment and the community. The inclusion of various rail options in the ES in preference to road haulage is an example of the responsiveness of Kalbar to this process. And the entire community, including Council, will have the opportunity to read, digest, and respond to these technical studies and the overall EES in the coming months. Under the Local Government Act, we understand that councillors in their deliberations should act without bias and consider the greater good of the whole community. In regard to the views of the community, I would like to give insight into an independent survey of community views on the fingerboards project, which was completed in November this year. In a random telephone survey of 152 people,
Please stop calling out.
in a random telephone survey of 152 people in the East Gippsland and Wellington regions, the survey found that 65% of respondents had yet to make up their minds about the project. For those people within the East Gippsland Shire, of which there were 93 respondents, and I'm told that that is representative, over 60% of respondents had yet to make up their minds about the project. And this survey result suggests that the majority of the East Gippsland community are awaiting the outcome.
Please stop. There is 20 seconds left.
Are awaiting the outcome of the ES process before deciding whether they support or oppose the project. And I would be happy to brief Council on the full results of this survey. Councillors, I respectfully request that you consider your legal position regarding this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hugo.
And how supporting this motion at this stage will compromise your Council's ability to make.
Members in the gallery, you need to keep it down because councillors are unable to hear what the speakers are saying. We keep interrupting. Let him finish.
Let me repeat that. Councillors, I respectfully request that you consider your legal position regarding this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hugo. I'll have to wrap you up there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peter Reifman.
Madam Mayor, councillors, staff, visitors, guests. My wife and I moved here 4 years ago from Sydney to a farm in Kalulu. We bumped into a bunch of people in the area who seemed to be very happy, and we said, "Why are you so happy?" And the response was universally, "When you live in paradise, why wouldn't you be?" I note on the documentation that the Council's mission says a leading local government that works together with our communities to make East Gippsland the most livable region in Australia. It's been very much like that. My wife decided that as part of us moving here, she would start up a bed and breakfast facility. She was delighted to find that the council was very supportive of things that encourage tourism, and so we are now operating in our third summer holiday season. In our first few months, many of our guests have said that they have been so delighted with its peaceful serenity. And they have said many times that the experience has been so wonderful, they want to come back and they want to tell their friends about it as well. The view from the cottage that I built with a friend, just as well I had a friend because he knew what he was doing, gives us a view directly across the Lindenau Flats. The Lindenau Flats, including the comms tower at Fernbank, which is adjacent to where the Kalbar Resources have a current property. I can see directly from my bed and breakfast cottage the proposed mine site. I wonder if my guests will say the same thing if they are able to see and hear the impacts of a mine such as is proposed. Incidentally, in case you're thinking that because I'm in Kalulu it's a long way away, I can hear when the Lindenau fire bell goes off. and it's confirmed when my pager goes off to say that the Flaggy Creek Brigade has also been called. The Kalbar site is approximately double that distance, but the noise, I'm sure, would be significantly more. I'm sure that would have a significant impact. And it's not just my accommodation. I speak here as if you like, a potential victim impact statement. I know that there are other accommodation facilities similar to mine in the area, one of which is actually approximately halfway between us and the mine site in the middle of Lindenow. Expanding on things a little, I have neighbours in the Lindenow Flats area. They employ many workers, many more workers than the handful of mostly FIFO workers that would be employed by the mine. Many of these may lose their jobs in the event of a severe contamination. That seems to me entirely too likely to happen, despite these assurances from Kalbar that they will be mitigated. I come from a project management background where risk is a core element of my responsibilities. Risk is measured as impact and likelihood measures, and when you have high levels of likelihood combined with high levels of impact, it's a severe warning. The things I look at as likely impacts, the risks are quite significant. I won't go into all of the details, but Debbie Carruthers has mentioned many of them already. The motion to rescind that I believe is in place, that has been suggested, is, I believe, a bit of a furphy, a red herring, because, as has been mentioned, there was already a council statement opposing the fracking. The substance of what we are requesting, council, is of the same magnitude, the same order of impact, the same type of activity. When the council was elected, the election was as representatives of the community, of the people. I urge you to take that responsibility to represent the community. My wife happened to do a number of calls around the retail precinct, and overwhelmingly people were horrified at what was going to be on the doorstep of the veggie growing areas as well as the town. And once again, I urge you to consider taking that responsibility for representing the community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Reifman. Joanne Eastman, can you please come to the microphone?
My name's Joanne Eastman. We have farmland either side of the mine. The mine is going to be right next door to where we've raised our children. I've been in the area for 40 years. I came down from central Victoria. I couldn't believe what a beautiful bit of land Glenullin was. It's gentle, it's got lovely valleys and hills, and it's so well treed. The animals do really well there. So many shelter trees. If a mine goes ahead there, there will be not one shelter tree on that space. When Kalbar talks about rehabilitation, the gypsum they need to try to keep those sodic soils in place will sterilise the soils. You will find a barren clay pit after that mine has been there. No farmer on this land now will ever be able to farm again. I don't know how you can expect we farmers from out of Glenulladale to tolerate things that you wouldn't tolerate yourselves. I first heard about the mine in November 2014 at a meeting at Mossy Face, and I was horrified to hear that they were looking at Glenulladale because, as Rob Bishop said, but has since denied, that there's nothing there but a burnt out blue gum plantation, a handful of sheep farmers and a few lettuce growers. He denies saying that. I heard him, every other person in that room heard him. That shows the total lack of respect that he has shown to us all the way through. I've been to most of the meetings that Kelborough have had. I've never had satisfactory answers to any questions. Most recently, I went to one where they gave supposed results of noise monitoring. They only looked at noise from trucks, which are quieter than they've ever been before. They haven't looked at noise from the mining unit plant. We know from down at Douglas Mine, people 12 kilometres away could hear the mining unit plant on still days, and they said it sounded like a machine gun going off in their backyard. You are asking my family to put up with that. We have no chance of compensation, no chance of moving from the land, and we don't want to. It's been in the family for over 100 years. My children love it. My children grew up there. They helped drove stock between the two paddocks. One of Kelborough's great new ideas is to close the road that we drove the stock on. When asked, Victor Hugo said, "Oh, you can buy a truck." Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hugo. Riding the horses, driving the stock is part of the pleasure of being on the farm out there. I'm asking Council to consider what it's like for people living out at Glenaladale. I'm concerned about the risk further afield, but I'm deeply concerned for my family. My kids love that farm. My grandkids are coming up there now. They love it too. Are they going to have to be outside with earmuffs on to tolerate the noise? Are they going to have to wear masks to put up with the dust? We know from the Douglas mine that places 5 kilometres away had 20 times higher levels of radiation in the tank water than were there beforehand. That's why we're doing independent testing. You are asking people to put their health and lifestyles at risk, their physical, emotional, mental health at risk, for something that isn't even a necessary product. Iluka put out a report 2 years ago that said that there are close to 18 new mines starting up, mineral sands mines. If you look at the report, nearly all of them are going to produce more zircon and titanium dioxide than Kelborough are going to. Kelborough says we have to mine where the resource is. None of those other mines are going to go as deep as Kelborough's mine. There has never been a mine in Australia that has had to dig that deep to recover product. It is like digging up your backyard to find one pebble. It is just ridiculous, and they will never, ever rehabilitate it. I don't think I've got anything else to say. I'm just asking you to have a bit of pity on the people out there and a bit of thought for our land. And thank you, Alan, for your comments about needing to respect the land and respect the people.
Thank you, Mr. Eastman. Can I please ask David Warren to come to the microphone?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm in support of the motion to oppose the fingerboard's open cut mine at Glenaladale. My name is David Warren. I'm president of the Gippsland Lakes Recreational Fishing Alliance, Incorporated. This incorporates 3 groups: Save Our Lakes, No Nets Gibby Lakes, and the GACA. The GACA is the Gippsland Angling Clubs Association, and it represents the recreational angling clubs of East Gippsland. I am also a State Council representative for East Gippsland on the State Council of VR Fish. VR Fish is the peak representational recreational body that advises government in the state of Victoria on recreational fishing. We represent 840,000 recreational anglers, and we are opposed to this mine. We're opposed to the development of this mine or any mine, including the development of the old Stockman mine at Benambra, which poses an unacceptable threat to the Gippsland Lakes, be it contamination or demand for water. The Gippsland Lakes, as you've heard here tonight, are Ramsar listed. They're a drought refuge for birds and other protected or endangered species. The recently elected state Labor government committed to remove commercial nets from the Gippsland Lakes. They also committed to address the significant, and they are significant, ecological issues that already exist in the Gippsland Lakes. The reasons for this commitment were, it was to promote recreational fishing tourism in the Gippsland Lakes. The recognition that the Gippsland Lakes are a significant asset to East Gippsland, attracting people who enjoy a wide range of activities associated with the Gippsland Lakes. This will involve considerable commitment over many years to address habitat and ecological deterioration in the Gippsland Lakes. The recognition that the Gippsland Lakes are under considerable stress from reduced freshwater flows and from increased harvesting and reduced rainfall patterns over the last 50 years. Aquatic flora and fauna, including estuarine habitat, is threatened by increasing salinity, as well as industrial, agricultural pollution and nutrient runoff. But due to a significant decline in the iconic fish species over the last 30 years, like black brim, dusky flathead, estuary perch and Australian bass, considerable restocking will be required. Restocking has become essential in many of Victoria's waterways because conditions are not conducive to natural recruitment. These conditions are reflective of poor management, inappropriate development, as well as climate change. The complexity of the problems to be resolved do not need further pollution or poor management at either local or state government level. The Gippsland Lakes are a significant asset to East Gippsland and the state of Victoria. Any development which risks an adverse event that runs the risk of polluting the rivers of the Gippsland Lakes is unacceptable to the Victorian recreational fishing community. The Victorian government has invested $46 million over the last 4 years in its Target 1 Million program, with creek programs of restocking and improving fishing facilities. To encourage recovery, the Andrews Labor government will continue this restocking program as part of its Target 1 Million. In the last 4 years, 6 million fish were released in the Victorian waterways. The intention is to grow this to 10 million over the next 4 years. Recently, there were over 57,000 estuary perch and Australian bass released into the rivers of the Gippsland Lakes. This is the beginning of considerable investment in East Gippsland by the state Labor government. I have been informed by the VFA, the Victorian Fisheries Authority, that further stocking of dusky flathead and possibly black brim will be undertaken when commercial nets are finally removed from the Gippsland Lakes.
I'll have to ask you to finish there, Mr. Warren.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I please ask Mr. John Hine to come to the microphone, please?
Yeah, I'm John Hine, a veggie grower out on the flat, and we've been out there for 42 years on the farm, growing broccoli, Collins cabbage, various lines, and the farm is just 500 metres from the mine site, which worries us immensely. We're very worried about a lot of issues like dust and that, but I'm here to represent about 80% of the veggie growers. There's still 80%. There's still about a few still waiting for the ES process, which I think will be a big worry. We're concerned dust would be one of our major concerns. When you look at 600 to 800 acres of overburden sitting up on top of the hill there, I've seen the dust blow from out from Linno there, hitting Mount Taylor at times. You know, dust travelling that far, so that dust will fly across there in 2 minutes flat. So you know, there's all these nasty things in the, well, we feel there's nasty things in the, will be in the dust. So our quality assurance program, which is we must have no contamination at all, which is zero tolerance to foreign matter. So if we get a hit with dust contamination, it won't be just us, it won't be just Woodglen, it'll be the whole Linno Flats will be under threat. Like, I mean, if you look at strawberries in Queensland, they might have been grown at Stanthorpe, but they all put in the one package Queensland strawberries, you know, stuff like that. Yeah, so a lot of businesses rely on the Linno Flats to survive, like all the flow and effect of all that that side of it. You're looking at 20% of McDonald's lettuces come from the Linno Flats. Probably 30 to 50% of the fresh produce going to the markets come from the Linno Flats. So dust, you know, if we get any hit, we'll lose our business. So we worked hard to get that up and running. The whole Linno Flats is one of the most beautiful places, clean and green, and we really can't afford to risk it in any way. Like, we got the Woodland School, which you know, they rely on tank water. They have playgroups there. There's 20, say, little babies there every week for playgroups. The school's still operating, K&a from the mine site, which is poor. Will not be there when it's wind's blowing too strong. Water on the river. The water, we use it for washing the veggies, to irrigate. We make ice from the water, and if any contamination in that water supply, well, we just can't afford to have any contamination runoff from the mine site, which is, they claim that they can block the gullies. They can block the gullies and keep the water back, but when we get the big rains out there, they'll never, the engineering solution, it just won't work. Not in a million years. I've been there and I've seen it coming out of the gullies, and you're looking at 6 or 8 feet of water coming out 3 gullies, coming down into the river, you know, 400 or 500 metres from the river. Coalbar claim they're going to, when asked where they, how long will they be near the river, the 500 metres zone, they say, oh, we're only there a little while. Well, a little while might mean, say, is that, well, it takes from the time they start digging to when they rehabilitate is 5 years. So I don't think a little while's, that's not a little while, that's 5 years of operation within 500 metres of the river. So, you know, there are a few of the points there. Some of the veggie growers are organic growers, so they've got a very, their certificate is just 0 to everything. They, we've got a clean green image out there, one of the best in Australia, I reckon, and it just can't be, it can't be affected by this. I just can't believe they're going to try and put a mine in this site. It's just completely not suitable. You know, I'm not against mining or industry or anything like that, but that location is just hugely wrong. Just should never. I just have nightmares over it. Like, you know, I'm not the only one. All these people here, we're all here, and we're not here for the fun of it.
I'll have to ask you to finish there, Mr. Hine. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Neil Barraclough. Just a reminder, there's 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, councillors. Just a bit of background. I've taken an interest in climate and particularly mega droughts that have affected the world for about the last 35 years. Droughts 30 to 50 year droughts devastated Peruvian communities, 550 AD, 1100 AD, and I became particularly interested in these droughts when I had my attention drawn to evidence of similar droughts in Australia. I've sent the councillors an email, and in there I have a link to a submission I put in January 2009, which details a swamp on the Murrumbidgee, 100-acre swamp lagoon. It fills up every time, I think from memory, the Murrumbidgee floods to 23 feet, and if they don't get a flood to 23 feet for 10 years, it dries right out. It has dried out twice since European settlement around 1840. It was dry for about 3 months in 1915, and it was dry from 1945 to around 1950. Now, the interesting thing about it is there are said to be 50-year-old dead trees in the bottom of this swamp. So sometime in the recent past, we've had like a 60-year mega drought, which has caused this swamp to dry out. Now, there's a similar example down at Longford where a swamp dried out for the first time in 1914-15 to reveal 50-year-old dead trees in the bottom of it. But that swamp has now virtually been totally surrounded by pines, so it is normally, or very often now, quite dry. But up from the 1840s to 1915, it hadn't dried out. When it did dry out, 50-year-old dead trees in the bottom of it. Carrs Creek down at Seaspray, there's a 100-foot long pool, 30-foot wide, 30-foot deep. They had a very dry period, early to mid-1940s, and there's a pool in it. It's never been known to have done it before, but the creek stopped running and it dropped about 2 metres to reveal the branches of a dead tree growing out from under the waterline. Now, we've had the same mega droughts in the past that wiped out the Peruvian civilisations, and we have enough rainfall record to see that rainfall follows solar activity, and the higher the solar activity, the higher the rainfall. The period from the 1940s to 1996 is said to be anywhere from the highest solar activity for 1,000 years to 8,000 years. So what we think of as normal is very likely a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 8,000 year high. Now, I've emailed you a link to a New Scientist article of 1989 from memory, where it details how every 200 or so years you get periods of 3 to 5 decades of low solar activity, and that link says that early this century we will be returning to that period of low solar activity. Now, I was a speaker at a forum organised by the East Gippsland Wildfire Task Force in October 2005, and I detailed this, and I said in the near future we are very likely going to be approaching a period of very low solar activity that will go for several decades. At that time, the world's solar scientists were all saying the opposite. They're saying we're expecting very high solar activity. By 2009, the world's solar scientists had changed to saying that we're headed for a period of very low solar activity, and now there's virtually universal acceptance amongst the solar scientists that we're looking at probably 3 to 5 decades of very low solar activity. So we are almost certainly going into the same climatic conditions that dried up the swamp on the Murrumbidgee, dried up the swamp at Longford for maybe 60 years. So that is the conditions that we are going into, very likely going into, and for council not to oppose the allocation of water to Calbar would be simply negligent if you can't challenge anything I'm saying. I've sent you an email. You are welcome to challenge anything I've said. I invite you to, but simply waiting for an EES, which is a means of basically absolving the decision makers such as yourself and state government from the responsibility. They can simply, the mining company can simply employ consultants to put up a dodgy EES, and it takes away your responsibility. You have to regain that responsibility. And
thank you, Mr. Barraclough.
It's really a good discussion, essentially, because
Dr. Nicola Watts. Can you please come to the microphone? Just a reminder, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Mayor and councillors. My name's Nicola Watts, and I'd just like to acknowledge, obviously, the deep and heartfelt concerns that are being expressed here by individuals. I'm not here, though, presenting on the behalf of myself. I'm here on the behalf of the East Gippsland Food Cluster. So we're a collaborative network of regional agri-food businesses who look after the sustainable development of our important agri-food sector. So I'd just like to note that agri-food actually underpins our regional economy, and our region plays a very strong role in Victoria and Australia's food supply chains. Our region is well positioned to continue to play a vital role in local, domestic and global supply chains and food security into the future. The East Gippsland Food Cluster, together with local and state government partners, is working very hard to build on from this strong regional base in agri-food and position the region as a premium food and wine production area. Together with East Gippsland Marketing, we've been implementing a regional produce branding strategy, the East Gippsland Produce Naturally Good brand, which is not only designed to support our agri-food sector, but also encourage further regional visitation. All of this is premised on East Gippsland's clean, green environment and image. East Gippsland Food Cluster has been broadly concerned about potential negative impacts of mining on the agri-food sector, and in August of 2017 unanimously moved a motion that the East Gippsland Food Cluster is not supportive of any form of mining activities that pose a threat to prime agricultural land, waterways and aquifers in eastern Gippsland. The East Gippsland Food Cluster is concerned about the potential impacts of the proposed mineral sands mine. These threats are considered as both perceived, that is, they could detract from the clean and green image of our region amongst customers, as well as real, that is, they present threats to land, soil and water. The East Gippsland Food Cluster therefore believes that a highly risk-averse approach needs to be adopted in relation to this matter. However, having said that, the Food Cluster is also aware of the Victorian Government's environmental effects statement. We do respect that process and are awaiting the outcomes of that process. Many of our members are actually actively engaged and being a consultant in that process. We want to see an EES which provides a clear evidence base of the risks, the significance of those risks, the requirements, the full requirements of mitigating those risks, and full consideration of whether those risks can be adequately mitigated. We will await the outcomes of that EES when it's available in 2019, where we hope we have a shared and public document, and on the basis of that we can assess the outcomes, reflect on the robustness of the EES process itself, and determine the extent to which the mine does propose a threat to our prime agricultural land, waterways and aquifers in eastern Gippsland, and whether we need to make more comprehensive submissions into the further EES process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watts. Miss Eva Harris-Mew.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Eva. I'm 12 years old. I'm not as big as you are. That's because I'm still a child. I am too young to vote, but that doesn't mean I can't speak out. I have a clear brain and a strong voice. How many other people like me who can't vote do you think there are in East Gippsland? Maybe 20,000 or even more. And yet there is silence. Who speaks for them? Tonight, I do. If they were all here with me tonight, they'd fill the whole building and the gardens outside and right down Main Street. Please, don't gamble with our future. Please advise the government that you stand against this toxic mind that will destroy, that makes East Gippsland magic. Its beautiful lakes, rivers, rich food bowl, clean air and water. Grown-ups lecture us kids about not taking risks, especially not to gamble. And this is what you are allowing. You are gambling with our future. Please, I urge you, don't gamble with our inheritance. I may be only one little person, but thousands of children are around us tonight. We were excited when Councillor Roberts was elected, the youngest councillor in this Shire. We thought perhaps then we would now have a voice. He cares about our future. That's what tonight is about. Please, as grown-ups, act for the future generations. Time is running out. Our future is in your hands.
Thank you, Eva. Mr. Alan Sheridan, can you please come to the microphone?
We are not local people. We came in 1959, and since then I've worked in the stock and station agency business. I started in an area from Woodside through to Traralgon, up to Dargo, Omeo, Penambra, Delegate, and back to Bairnsdale initially with the New Zealand loan. Later on, I worked mainly from Stratford through to Bega as manager of the Australian Estates, a branch that I opened. I've had a lot of experience with land. During my time in these jobs, I was involved in selling well over 40 farms, as well as a lot. I was responsible for running the cattle sales for the estates at Penambra, and I instigated the cattle sales at Delegate, the circuit cattle sales. I've been on nearly every farm in that district that ran sheep, and most of the ones that ran cattle in my time in that business. So I don't hide behind a degree. I'm a practical person, and I understand land. I understand the value of land. I worked on the valuation group for the East Gippsland Shire, value in the Tambo Shire for rating purposes for a year, which gave me a big insight into local government and the rating system and how inequitable it is for farmers, but I won't get onto that subject tonight. What concerns me about this project is when you look around that huge area of East Gippsland, and then you go out and stand on the bank of the Mitchell River with all that knowledge of land, what land is worth, what it'll carry, and various types of land, and you stand on the banks of John Hines' farm, and you look across the river, and you think to yourself, in that whole area of Gippsland, there is not a more unsuitable place to put a mine. My main concern is our aquifers on the Red Gum Plain. We have on our farm where we live 63 troughs. If the aquifer was stuffed up, which they all tell us it won't be, but we heard that, and the people of Woodside heard that years ago. Ask them what happened to them. And also, our son and his partner and his 3 children have a farm at Wak Wak, and they were discussing this with a Calabar bloke, and he said, "You've got nothing to worry about where you are." And Andrew said to him, "See where your thumb is?" And he said, "Yeah, that's where my house is." And you're saying that's in a direct line of the prevailing winds. This is the stories that these people will try and put over you. In my lifetime, I've worked with a lot of con men. And if ever I saw a con on some of these meetings I've been attending, and they've walked out of one of them at Lindenow, if ever I've seen a mob of con men, they are it.
Thank you, Mr. Shire. Please don't.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A member from the Bairnsdale Koori Youth Council. Just a reminder, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Casey Ritchie speaking on behalf of the Koori Youth Council. Before I start, the Bairnsdale Koori Youth Council proudly acknowledges the Gunai Kurnai people. We acknowledge their rich and continuous culture and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge the Gunai Kurnai people as the first peoples and traditional owners and custodians of the land and water on which we live, work and play. We show respect to the Gunai Kurnai people by conducting our business accordingly and in the best interest of all the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people we work with. We recognise and value the ongoing contribution of the Gunai Kurnai peoples, and we embrace the spirit of self-determination and reconciliation, working towards a shared vision of equality and ensuring an unbiased voice for all. Is there any water in this? You'll have to excuse me. The thought of a mine going in after hearing those stories tonight is physically making me sick. On behalf of the Bairnsdale Koori Youth Council and the wider Aboriginal community, we say no to any form of mining developments in our community. Most of you may know East Gippsland has some of the oldest and most substantial cultural sites in the world. These cultural sites provided a valuable insight into the rich history of the land. The rock formations, ceremonial sites and trading and hunting grounds found in and around Glenadale are extremely meaningful to our Gunai Kurnai people, and its preservation is vitally important for our identity and the continuation of our rich cultural heritage. As a community, many of these sites and more are facing threats from mining developments, and the proposed mine will unequivocally affect our ancient local history. As a community, we cannot let this happen. We also know our region is proudly home to some of the best quality farming lands in Victoria. Developing a mine here will affect every farmer and resident in and around the southeast area. It will also put an end to the $200 million a year Lindenow Flats vegetable growing industry, and it will jeopardise our local fishing and tourism industries. It is proven in other areas, both nationally and internationally, that mining causes a colossal and irreversible damage to the environment. We do not want to see this happen in our beautiful Gippsland lakes and surrounds, which is home to many. The risks associated with developing a mine prevail over any benefits, if any. Furthermore, We know that if mining goes ahead, it will negatively affect people, plants and animals by forcing them from their homes and their land, preventing them from accessing clean water and land. It will impact on our culture, health and livelihoods and those of our future generations. It causes divisions in communities and it changes the social dynamic as a community, as we've seen tonight. These impacts are exacerbated when our local people aren't consulted and we're not given any form of information about a planned mine. Even worse is when people are not giving a say on whether or not a mine should even be developed. In our closing statement, we want to reiterate that it is extremely important that these lands are not disturbed and the locations that tell a story behind this land are not destroyed in the name of mining development. We want to keep this land strong and healthy for all of our children so they can go out bush hunting and fishing in a safe, clean environment. Without water and without clean country, none of us can survive. We all need to come together for the future of our children and their children. For many Aboriginal people, for the people of South East Gippsland and for our wildlife and ecosystems, land is life, which means more than a mere source of income. And it is extremely important that we collectively fight this mine all the way to the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ritchie. The last speaker is George Neofaitu, if George is here. Are you speaking on George's behalf?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm speaking on behalf of George Neofaitu, barrister and solicitor, who is not able to attend tonight for health reasons. The following is what George has written. Council does not require legal advice in making a decision on Councillor Roberts' notice of motion. The notice of motion in question is a political decision and not a legal one. Councillors are well aware that the decision to proceed with the proposed Fingerboards mineral sands mine is a Victorian government decision. Any decision by council would be clearly ultra vires, thus it allows seeking advice in this respect is pointless. In essence, council has no legal power to inquire about. The real issue and focus here is council can have a political view on the subject mine and whether it should exercise it. The motion framed by the Labor member, Councillor Mark Reeves, appears to be directed by the Victorian Labor government to interfere with or stifle the independence of the East Gippsland Shire Council from actually having an opinion, and more importantly, seeks to take away council's...
Ms Wagner, I think that relates to the next motion.
Sorry?
That relates to the next motion, so can you please keep it relevant to...
It covers both. It covers both. Sorry, now... The independence of the East Gippsland Shire Council from actually having an opinion, and more importantly, seeks to take away council's mandated influential role in the extractive mining activities with its jurisdiction and determining its suitability. We are lucky to have a diverse council with considerable experience and local knowledge who are capable of deciding whether a project is appropriate given competing uses of land. The primary issue with this mining project is there is a long-term, extremely viable use of this land, and one use cannot live next door to the other use. And no environmental management considerations can change this. I consider council should have been expressing its opinion from the very start and even sought the responsible minister's intervention to overturn the project in this dominant agricultural area. Far too much emphasis is placed on the monetary benefits of the mining project by comparing the financial values of agricultural returns versus mining returns. In economics, a social science, the comparison is the benefit to society of a healthy agricultural industry, supplying 30 to 50% of vegetable production to Melbourne markets that can grow exponentially with increased water allocations, opposed to an extractive industry that predominantly supplies pigments and ceramic materials. The latter is obviously not a real necessity to society and imposes a heavy environmental penalty on the people near the epicentre of mining, and given our lake system a high risk to convey contaminants to far beyond destinations. I urge councillors not to be deterred in fulfilling a decision to actively oppose the project by agreeing to this misguided abeyance to obtain legal advice. I have heard a number of alarming and false accusations levelled at councillors, even threats of legal action. If these statements are true, they are made to essentially intimidate you from taking a stand and in fact are baseless at law. I reiterate, it is within Council's purview to take a position on the mine without requiring legal advice. As with all decisions by councillors, not everyone may agree or like the outcome, but as the executive and civic leaders, you need to take a course for the overriding benefit of everyone in the Shire as your charter defines. A refusal of this notice of motion does not bar you from participation in all the steps open in the environmental effects statement process or in any points listed in the Councillor Reeves' rationale.
Thank you, Ms Wagner. Okay, 2.1, notice of motion number 3, 2018, proposed mineral sands mine at the Fingerboards, Glenaladale.
Like to move it.
I was waiting for Councillor Roberts to...
Sorry, I'll just find it on my computer.
No.
Madam Mayor, whilst Councillor Roberts is seeking his notes, is there any comment from any officer in relation to this presentation this evening?
No, it's a notice of motion.
Take notice that it is my intention to move at the ordinary meeting of Council to be held on Tuesday the 11th of December 2018 at 6 p.m. or at any adjournment to that meeting, that Council, in the interest of a sustainable East Gippsland economy, society and environment, will protect the long-term viability of East Gippsland's agriculture and tourism industries and ensure the voice of the East Gippsland community is heard by, point 1, stating our opposition to a proposed mineral sands mine proceeding in the Glenaladale area, and point 2, writing to the Premier, appropriate federal, state and shadow ministers, advising them of Council and the community's position on this matter and asking for their support in actively prosecuting this motion both in Parliament and in public to protect East Gippsland. I assume that councillors have read the rationale, and I don't think there's anything to add apart from what the members of the gallery have already said, so I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Seconder, would you like to address the gallery?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to begin by saying that as elected councillors, we have been given a charter to represent people of East Gippsland. And in seeing so many people here in the gallery, I must say that Eva, you were great, because us of the older generation, we may, if this mine goes ahead, we may never even see the end of it, but what our passion is, as citizens of this community, is to try and protect our region for the younger generation. That is our charter. I, like many of the speakers here tonight, am not against mining, but we find that this mine site is in the worst possible position for East Gippsland. The risks could, the risks are tremendous. The possibility of something happening in the 20 years could be devastating to our area. So I support Councillor Roberts' motion, and I urge others around the table to support it also, because you are just a small portion. Those of you in the gallery tonight are a small portion of our community, and most of you don't live in Glenalladale, you live in East Gippsland, so you understand the possibilities of what could happen to our entire region, not just those people who live in Glenalladale. So please support this motion.
Madam Mayor, if I may take your indulgence, before any further debate commences, I'd like to put to the bench here this evening two amendments to Councillor Roberts' motion that is before us. I'd like to, if I may have your indulgence, to put those before you.
Let me just, yep, that's fine. They have to be accepted by Councillor Roberts. Are you prepared to listen to the amendments, Councillor Robert?
With all due respect to Councillor Ellis, and I appreciate his point of view, and I've read his amendments, and they're mostly, it's 99% the same thing, but I believe that the motion on the table now is more direct and it sends a clearer message, so I can't support it.
Madam Mayor, perhaps if you were to hear my amendments, it might make it a bit more understandable what I've got to say, and I think Councillor Roberts will appreciate that.
Sorry, Councillor Ellis.
So I have the right to do that?
I'll have to defer to the CEO for this one.
My understanding is that it's been the amendment that he can say and ask, he can put it forward, but whether it's accepted or not, it doesn't want to be heard. So he still has a right to speak for or against the motion.
Can you say the amendment or not? Can you say the amendment? Okay, so if Councillor Ellis is moving an amendment, we are able to hear it, but he would need a seconder for it to get up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'll put the amendment to Council and then seek a seconder. And if I don't gain a seconder, then my amendment will fail. Okay, I'll read it to you. It's very simple, and it's an insertion commencing from the basis of Councillor Roberts' motion, and that is...
We need to listen to it first before it's seconded.
Yeah. That Council, and the amendment is, I introduced the words, in representing the wishes of its community. That's the amendment. And in the interests of a sustainable East Gippsland economy, society and environment, will work to protect the long-term viability of East Gippsland's agriculture and tourism industries whilst ensuring the voice of the East Gippsland community is heard by. 1, stating the community's opposition to proposed mineral sands mining proceeding in, and I have changed the wording there, my amendment is the East Gippsland region. My words then continue, writing to the Premier, appropriate federal, state and shadow ministers, advising them of councils and the community's position on this matter and asking for their support in actively prosecuting this position, both in Parliament and in the public, to protect East Gippsland. 3, a new amendment, writing to our local federal member, Mr Darren Chester, and our local state representative, Mr Tim Bull, advising them of councils and the community's position, requesting that they publicly support their community by undertaking the actions requested in dot point 2 of Councillor Roberts' motion. And 4, that such actions be undertaken in an efficient and timely manner. They are my amendments. I seek someone to second that.
Can I have a point of clarification, please, Madam Mayor? Thank you. Councillor Ellis, I'm just curious, you've changed the words to the East Gippsland region, and we're actually just talking about the fingerboard site being the most inappropriate, and I think that hearing the gallery, they're basically saying it's this particular site which is inappropriate. I'm just trying to get clarification.
Hang on, please, in the gallery, please be quiet.
To assist you, Councillor Peltz,
Thank you.
the mineral deposit sands stretch from the fingerboard to Glen Allerdale right through to Mossy Face. So what affects Glen Allerdale in the immediate period or will affect Mossy Face potentially into the future, and that is why I've asked for this amendment to be considered.
I'll just point to the gallery and to my councillor colleagues here. I was in the belief that there was a proposed mineral sands project, and correct me if I'm wrong, and it was at the down at Nower in the bush there, and I was wondering whether that was acceptable.
If I could correct you, that was an iron ore proposition.
Okay. Thank you. I'm getting the two mixed up. Thank you.
Does Councillor Ellis have a seconder?
Councillor Buckley.
Councillor Buckley, thank you.
Can I just ask for a quick point of clarification from the CEO? Sorry.
You can try.
Yeah, it's an easy one. If Councillor Ellis's motion is not carried now, Councillor Ellis's amendment, does that default back to? Okay. Thank you.
If I may, I'll speak very briefly to this matter. It's clear that, well, even by looking at the representation here this evening, that this is an issue of community, of which council is an integral part of it and a voice of the community. Resultingly, I felt that the introduction of those wishes, that comment on wishes, would give strength to the community to know that council is listening and that we have taken into account the drive of Councillor Roberts' motion. Secondly, the introduction of the East Gippsland region is, as I have explained in my response to Councillor Peltz, that it covers the wider area that is of concern to us all. The request for the local federal members is just an extension of the voice of the community, and it would of course be their choice, but I would bring it to their attention. And with, in relation to the final point, point 4, be undertaken in an efficient and timely manner, you know, this issue has been going on for quite a number of years. Started with the issue emanating out of our concern for fracking in this region, and it's a continuing problem, and it needs to be addressed sooner than later. So instead of allowing it to go through the system and sit there, we want to raise this concern. I will speak further in this process, but that's the basis of my amendment, my request for the amendments. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Okay. As I see it, it strengthens Councillor Roberts' motion, and I strongly support that, Dick. So the more ammunition he can get, you know, the stronger his arm. So thank you for that, Councillor Roberts.
Councillor Peltz, you had a question?
Yes, I'd like a bit of information about if we weren't to support this, about the legal part of it, if we were to support this, what the legal implications were, if we weren't to support this, what the legal implications are to the councillors.
Okay, just to clarify that question, if you're asking me the question on the legal basis of, this is to the amendment? Yeah, are you asking this to the amendment? I say that it changes nothing, and Pat's taking on board Councillor Buckley's comments. It strengthens and shows more representative comment in relation to it. In terms of, and I was going to address the matter of the legalise issues in my words at a later time, but simply I'll say to you, if you recall how we dealt with the issue of fracking, Council was not impeded by any threats of legal action or impairment. This action here this evening, if Councillor Roberts' motion is successful, does not impede in any way the undertakings of the environmental effects statement. That is an action I managed at state level, and the decision makers in that level are the Minister for Planning. Council here will not be making any decision in relation to the environmental effects statement. That's a separate action. This issue is about representing the will and concern of our community.
Speakers against the motion?
I'd like to speak to the motion, if I may.
Sure.
To the amendment. I might not get another shot, so. We as councillors are democratically elected by the residents and the ratepayers of East Gippsland. Once elected, we are responsible for reviewing matters and debating issues before our council, and we take an oath of office to carry out this role impartially and to the best of our ability, and in the best interests of our municipality. That last point is the most important. Without the residents and the ratepayers, none of us would be around the table this evening. The motion I've brought to the table tonight, the motion that Councillor Ellis has amended tonight is requesting that this council, on behalf of a concerned community, states its opposition to the mineral sands mining project at Glenullardale and East Gippsland. Approximately 3,000 individuals, 200 businesses and 83% of the affected landholders have stated their opposition to the project, and we cannot ignore them. Opposing councillors may say that we must follow the due process and wait for the EES to be submitted. And while I totally agree in following process, council must also be vigilant. It must constantly review its processes and always be working to achieve the best outcomes for the community. Since the year 2000, 2 reviews and a parliamentary inquiry have focused on the Environmental Effects Act and the EES process. They found the legislation and associated EES process to be costly and lacking clarity and transparency. Between the year 2000 and 2013, successive governments committed to reforming the EES process, yet no significant legislative changes have occurred. Opposing councillors may say that if this motion is carried, then we'll lose the ability to make a submission to the EES when it is released. However, we've been advised by council officers who have advised that the adoption of such a resolution would not prevent council's further involvement in the EES process or the technical reference group. I will also remind those councillors that only one mine has been denied approval at that stage of the process. So what good is making a submission to the EES if it falls on apparently deaf ears? So while I believe in following due process, we can't sit on our hands while our largest employer that reportedly earns $200 million per year, our Ramsar wetlands and the Gippsland lakes are potentially put at risk by this project that is subject to a flawed EES process. Some may say that I'm being partial, but that is incorrect. I'm doing my job, which is to represent our community, and the community does not want this mine. Fellow councillors, I urge you to consider this amendment. The motion will not stop the EES from going ahead. However, it sends a clear message to our state and federal representatives. The community does not want this mine.
Pardon? Question, Councillor Peltz.
Thank you. With our research, all the councillors that have attended many, many hours about this item that we're discussing, some of us had travelled to Western Australia and had a look at some of the comparable ones. Hear me out. Hear me out. I have a right to speak at this table, and I'd like to say when I came back from the first journey, I actually saw no issues with it. Recently, only last month, we actually travelled to the western side of the state, and our Officer of Director, Paul Holton, put a really great program together, and we were able to talk to other councils that actually had mines, mineral sand mines, operating in their areas, and we were able to talk with the councillors directly. It gave us a whole lot of insight as to what actually happened, and I just want the community to know that we have really had some really good research into this. Their input was fantastic. They put us in directions that we actually had no idea about, and they put us on the front line of how to cope with a mining such as this in their regions. Some of the sneaky stuff that went on, and some of the implications that were very relevant to what you're all saying tonight. And we hear you and we're saying, yes, this is something that we're adhered to, but as leaders in the process and someone that actually has an input into keeping the community safe, I can hear what you're all saying as a magnated group, but I'm also conscious of what is behind the scenes and what needs to be adhered to policy-wise, that our community, if we say now, this is what I'm conflicted with, if we say now we don't want this, it's not going to go away, it's still going to happen and gurgle along in the background because the Minister has the final say in this issue. So for me to make a decision on this tonight, I need to be...
And please, excuse me.
I do agree with the community, but my voice...
Councillor Peltz, do you have a point of clarification?
To voice. Now, my bottom line is to be able to fully protect the community. There's a whole lot of issues that happen in the planning section, in the planning area, that if we commit ourselves to this tonight, we may not have a say in it. It might be taken out of our hands.
Excuse me.
Well, you can say bullshit, but the bottom line is we are actually the drivers in the community seat, and for this to happen, I'm really cautious of, and whilst I fully agree with what's going on here, I actually am reserved in committing a vote towards this because of the implications behind the scene that will protect the community more. So,
please, excuse me. If you cannot be respectful in here, you will be asked to leave.
One of the things we actually saw from the Horsham Council was the fact that the mine had been given the go-ahead to have the extractions from their community in the farming areas, and then the next thing was the processing plant, and they ended up with this really huge dump site, which was then considered a waste facility. And that was the thing for me that actually turned around in the process. And they actually said that there were extractions in the way of uranium and various other heavy metal issues that were contaminants as an outcost of the mining sector. And they were actually then bringing other contaminants in from South Australia and various other places and dumping them at this site. So to me, I'm looking at it, and the issue arose because it was actually a change in their working plan, which was actually part of the given fact that they could mine there, which was given to them from the minister. And their council had voiced their opinion, and that opportunity to voice against the change in the plan was then taken away from their council because they had decided they didn't want that in their community. So for me, well, what I'm saying is this is what I've heard from our journeys from afar, and we have done a lot of research.
Please keep it down.
And I hope that they've learnt from it, and I hope we can actually use it to our advantage in our region. So with that said, I'd just like to leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peltz. Any further speakers for or against?
Madam Mayor, with due respect, can I just remind everyone that we are still adopting the amendments to the substantive motion, and I'm not, and I'm not seeking any conversations in relation to the ultimate motion. We're still at that amendment stage.
So we have to put it. Okay, so
I suggest, unless Councillor Ratino would like to speak, I think he's indicating that you put it to the vote.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll put the.
I'm reluctantly speaking against the amendment. I've been part of this East Gippsland community for the best part of 60 years. And I am passionate, and the people around this room are passionate, and I respect that. Dr. Nicola Watts also knows that I'm passionate about the agri-food sector in East Gippsland. In fact, over probably the best part of 30 years of my working life, have been a significant contributor to the agri-food sector in Lindenow in helping grow that sector. I do want to talk about the issue because I don't know, if people that don't know me, I don't like to play the person. I tackle the issue, and I would respect anybody's opinion in this room, and all I ask that they respect my opinion, whether they agree with it or not.
You're trying to say, we want to get the fill in there, mate. You respect our opinion so far.
I would like to better understand the extent to which this motion does impede the current councillors, this current council or future councils in relation to our statutory obligations prior to taking this position at the completion of the EES. And we all know, and it's been said here a couple of times tonight, that mining approvals are granted by the state government. We know that. As local government officials, we need to understand these proposals and the impacts on this community, our community, and on the whole region. You know, we've heard people talk about we must deal and support our whole Shire and our whole region, but we must deal in facts. As much as I have a very strong personal opinion in relation to the agri-food sector in this region and certain issues that may impact on that, they are my personal views. And I can't see that by taking a predetermined position right now, as much as whatever my personal views might be, can help us making a solid, well thought out decision once we have all the facts.
Please keep it down. Be respectful. We were respectful listening to you.
There was a couple of comments, and I thank young Eva for her presentation tonight. It was really heartfelt and does mean a lot to me. I also picked up on the the comment from the Koori Youth Group, and particularly the comments around the social dynamic is changing, and there has been a lot of galvanisation and polarising views in relation to this mine. But unfortunately, right here and now, I can't personally support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rotino.
Do you need to write a reply? Because I'm just wondering if... I think we've gone off the rails here. We're still talking, Madam Mayor, to the amendment to the motion, not to the substantive motion. And I think that's where the last couple of speakers have been going. And I'm asking the councillors to think about the words that I've introduced to Councillor Roberts' substantive motion, and ask you to support my amendments, and to not get confused with your positions in relation to the basis of the substantive motion. So
All right,
that's
so we'll put your amendment to the vote.
I'm asking to do that now. Yes, thank you.
Okay. All those in favour of the amendment, please show. It's 4 against. 4. All those are against. That's 3. So the motion is carried. The amendment is carried, and we are now... The amendment now becomes the motion. Thank you, Councillor Rotino.
Okay, we've pretty well spoken to the substantive motion, but there's a couple of things I would like to say, and I'll run through the notes. First of all, I want to congratulate Councillor Roberts as our youngest councillor for having the courage to put up such a strongly worded motion. It takes a fair bit of courage and research. It's been well thought out, his arguments. This is a tough subject for us to deal with, but we were elected to make these decisions, and that's what we're here for this evening. Now, I'm going to flick through, if you council can just bear with me, I'll flick through so I don't repeat a lot of the words that have been said. We've acknowledged, Councillor Rotino rightfully identified some of the great speakers, and I'd like to thank him for giving those young people that support. That was good work. And their work there. I want to also acknowledge a couple of things so we're not blurring things. One is that I made a note here is it is acknowledged that the proponents of the mine have acted within the law and are following the appropriate processes. An example of this is the intended creation of a well-researched environmental effects statement. It would be trite of council or anyone really to say they're not following the rule book. It's that process that's led us all here tonight. Again, I remind councillors that the environmental effects statement is in effect but an assessment process to provide authoritative advice to the statutory decision makers, and that any decision is on hold until the minister's assessment is made and considered. The decision is, the minister is the decision maker, not council. We are, of course, represented, and very ably, by Director Holton on the technical reference group, which is to the environmental effects statement. That committee with technical advice from a local, and he provides technical advice from a local government perspective. He is not representing the community or its position, and has not been charged to do so, so any attack on him would be very unjust. I'll skip over more on the environmental effects statement. I should also remind councillors that advice has been provided by a senior officer of DELP that any decision of council in regard to sand mining will not inhibit further interaction by council in the processes leading to the granting of a licence to mine, regardless of the position taken by council. That is, you know, in the process, and he was referring to the activities of the technical reference group, but it's I took away from that the wider situation. And on that point, I should remind councillors have been involved in the past and taken strong stands in relation to opposition to mining, without council being placed in any form of peril or unable to function appropriately. It was pleasing to note this evening, to see former councillor Peter Neal here this evening. Peter was a very strong opponent of the concept of fracking and strongly supported arguments against fracking in this very chamber. Thank you, Peter. That we are not alone in possessing mineral sands. Deposits in Victoria are estimated to be 260 million tonnes, including 8 million tonnes of rutile and 6 million tonnes of zircon. Much of these deposits are situated in the Western District, where a 50-year reserve of sands has been estimated. Like Councillor Peltz, I should also mention that my eyes were opened by the community interaction and the experiences of the two local councillors at Southern Grampians Council at Hamilton, where they had the processing plant, and then the impacts on the ratepayers and council in the city, rural city of Horsham. I should really thank those guys again for their openness and frankness. It was really wonderful to meet with those people after we left the mine, and I should also say the people from the mine at Iluka were also most helpful and informative. I'm just going to say, I don't think I need to go on about that. Now, on ESSS, I saw this the other night when I was thinking about how important these are. And I just want to remind councillors that the environmental effects statement is not an infallible process. And I was reminded of that, even though going through some serious rig, I can remind you of the Vic Roads Ballarat Highway error is a term used. In this case, an environmental effects statement recommended that 221 large old trees abutting the Western Highway be removed as part of an upgrade of the highway. In reality, there were 1,350 trees, a 600% error. And all of those trees were removed. And an inquiry clearly showed a paucity in consultation or counting of trees, so to speak. So that's a real good message to us, not to be overly intimidated, but to partake in the process, but to remain true to our roles as councillors. Councillors, I commend Councillor Roberts' motion before you and urge you to all support him. And as I said, I congratulate you for the quality and degree of thought you're putting to your first motion before council. Thank you. Thank you, councillors.
Are there any further speakers for the now motion? Speakers against? Any other speakers? Yeah, so no other speakers. Okay. If there's no other speakers, I will put the motion before you. All those in favour? All those against? Motion is carried. 4-3.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to suspend standing orders so the gallery can clear if they want to.
What about 2.2?
Oh.
We've still got another notice of motion.
No worries.
So I may as well go. Yeah, thank you. Okay, we've got some speakers to the next notice of motion, number 4, 2018, Councillor Roberts' notice.
Madam Mayor, we would need to bring that forward in the
Oh,
agenda.
do we?
We only have brought
Okay.
2.1 forward.
All right, so we'll go back.
We need a motion to bring it forward.
Right. Okay. Do we have a seconder to bring that forward? Thanks, Councillor Ellis. We're just bringing forward the next notice of motion because we've got some speakers. So can I get a vote on bringing that motion forward, please?
Okay, you're looking for a vote to bring it forward.
Bring the, yeah, in line with the agenda because we've
well, may I bring up a point of order here? On my agenda, it says that this is presented by Mark Reeves, but he's not here. And it's written here on my agenda. So I'm claiming that the matter's invalid. We don't have to deal with it because...
Thank you, Ms Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd just like to clarify for Councillor Buckley that the local law number 1, which governs the conduct of council meetings, actually specifically envisages this situation. So any councillor can move the notice of motion on behalf of Councillor Reeves.
That perhaps explains it, but I've never heard of this before. You know, respectfully, I've never heard of that happening before. So anyway, maybe there's some new laws that I don't know about, or new procedures.
Thank you, Miss Bennett. Miss Bennett will clarify for you, Councillor Buckley.
Say again.
Miss Bennett's just going to clarify further.
Yeah, just to clarify that while this situation, while you may not be able to recall this situation, it's not a recent amendment to the local law. In fact, it's been there for at least 10 years. Okay, so we'll hear from the speakers for this motion now, and I'll just call them as I have them. Miss Deb Foskey. Oh, sorry. We haven't spoken.
Madam Mayor, I think we... pardon me, Madam Mayor, I think we need to put it to the vote.
Sorry. So Councillor Rotino, and it was seconded by Councillor Ellis to move it forward in the agenda. So all those in favour to bring it forward? Thank you. Thank you, Ms Foskey. I'll just remind you, you've got 5 minutes.
I'm not speaking for the motion. That's quite true. Councillor Reeves' motion is meant to defer Council's response to Councillor Jackson's motion until the EES has been released. However, we've just had a vote on the substantive amended motion, and I do wonder if it makes the Councillor Reeves' motion redundant, but nonetheless, I will continue. Since the environmental effects statement is being prepared by KELBA, the proponents of the mine, we already know that the EES is very likely to support the mine going ahead. At best, it may suggest some amelioration measures to hide the mine's environmental impact, but by definition, it will not address the larger picture of the mine's impact on a sustainable future for East Gippsland. This magic place, and that's Council's own selling point for its Shire. Following the copper mine at Benambra, whose tailings dam is already leaking into the Tambo River, the mineral sands mine, if it goes ahead, is very likely to be followed by other mines. How the magic will survive this assault on the landscapes that make East Gippsland special needs to be explained. East Gippsland's magic is contained in our forested mountains, the rivers that flow pristine out of them, the rich valleys they water, and the coastal lakes that they nourish. It's hard to believe that our governments are prepared to sacrifice these rare natural assets for 15 to 20 years of landscape destruction through mineral extraction. East Gippsland, councillors, is magic because we're different from the rest, not just of this state, but pretty much the whole world. Governments have a duty of care not just to the natural environment, but to the communities that depend upon healthy soils and rivers. Will we be assured by the environmental effects statement that the water supply of most of our residents is safe, although the mine is less than half a kilometre from the Mitchell River, which supplies the bulk of our population? Councillors, despite the New Age dictum that magic just happens, we know that its elements must be carefully managed and cultivated. We can't have it both ways. Either we're an industrial landscape open to the next extractive project and the next, or we properly value and state it now what makes us magic, knowing that it can only become more valuable in our stressed world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. David Eagleson.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to address you. I'd like to say that this motion that is proposed by Councillor Reeves is totally invalid and can't be dealt with tonight. He actually, the wordings of he's talking about a motion and of Councillor Roberts. We don't have the motion of Councillor Roberts anymore. We have a resolution of the council, and his motion actually says that in consideration of the motion proposed by Councillor Roberts, hold any such action in abeyance until such time as legal advice is sought by or on behalf of the council, received and considered. Now, he's talking about a motion, and we don't have a motion anymore, we have a resolution. So his motion is totally invalid and can't be debated. I can speak with some authority on this type of thing. I've been a councillor twice, once one term here and another in another shire, and I have closely studied local law for many years. Now, the proposal by Councillor Reeves to have council seek legal advice before responding to community requests for a stand against the motion, the proposed standmine, is both unnecessary and mischievous. This would be another example of wasteful legal involvement that would need to be paid for by East Gippsland ratepayers. A council has a responsibility to reflect the wishes of its community, and it continually makes decisions without legal advice. It would appear that as legal advice is unnecessary, that the motivation must be to delay council taking a public position on the proposed mine. In doing this, it would be abdicating its responsibility to be a conduit for its community. To date, there has been inadequate liaison from community on the government-appointed technical reference group. It appears that council has not only been fence-sitting on the mine issue, but determined to ignore the serious concerns of the community. Councillor Roberts' motion would not interfere with the EES process, and in fact, if the council were able to have proper input, it would need to have properly arrived at a decision, which it has by now. It has now. And I'd like to also speak in support of the presentation made by Mrs Wagner earlier on behalf of George Neofaitu, a very experienced barrister and solicitor. He made it quite clearly that he quite clearly stated that no legal advice need be sought, and I 100% agree with his sentiments. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Eccleston. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms Bennett, could you please verify Mr Eagleson's statement regarding the wording of Councillor Reeves's motion?
I would need to take that one on notice, Councillor. I think I would need a few minutes on that one.
Yeah, so the Councillor Reeves's motion refers to my motion, which is now a resolution of council. So it invalidates that.
Look.
Well, I've got more people wanting to speak.
Well, perhaps I'd suggest, Madam Mayor, that to be completely fair and open, that we adjourn the meeting for a couple of minutes to allow Ms Bennett the opportunity to make some inquiries to see and if she can come back with an answer to Councillor Roberts' question. And if she can't get that information this evening, well, then we have to accept that. But perhaps she may have that ability, and that might then answer whether we continue this particular debate or we don't. Well, maybe. The only way we'll find out is for Ms Bennett to be given the opportunity to make inquiries.
Councillor White.
Madam Mayor, I just ask a question. You're saying there's still more speakers?
Yes.
Well, Ms Bennett said she needs a couple of minutes. If there's several more speakers, that's at least 10 to 15 minutes. Would you be able to do that while there's more speakers? Would you be able to research while the speakers still carry on?
I'm certainly prepared to attempt to.
Okay, thanks, Ms Bennett. So we'll carry on with the speakers, but again, there's no promises that we may be able to find this out this evening, so we'll carry on with the speakers. Miss Mendy Yuri, did she leave? No, Mendy's gone. Miss Joanne Eastman.
Hi, once again, I'm Joanne Eastman. I've got land at Glen Alladale, which were farmed for a number of years. First off, before speaking to the motion, I have a concern regarding council's ability to overturn, at the request of 3 councillors, the motion that's been voted on tonight, which happened earlier when they changed the timing of a previous motion Councillor Roberts had done. I understand there's a thing where 3 councillors can overturn a motion within 48 hours. Rescind, whatever it is. I would be very, very concerned if that happened after, which is your right to do, but if that happened after the public's shown such strong support for the motion. That's something I think we'll be all looking out for and being very wary of. Thank you. As I said, I've been looking into this mine for a number of years. I think Councillor Reeves's motion is quite mischievous. Several parts of it are actually factually incorrect, and I can't understand why he's put it forward. To claim that the EES process is the only process in place flies in the face of reality when we know that there was an EES process at Bastion Point that recommended against the development of that project, and yet the Minister allowed it to go ahead. So you can't argue one thing when you're flying in the face of what's happened previously. The council strongly supported Bastion Point. The EES said that it wasn't in favour of it, and yet the Minister allowed it to go ahead. The EES is certainly not an unflawed process. There's been problems with it all the way through. One of the biggest issues is that the proponent decides what their plan of study is going to be, and they can hide things from the public. They can certainly hide things from the government about what they want to put forward. And it's only been through a lot of pressure put on them by locals, by 72 submissions to the scoping requirement, that there's a reasonably extensive plan of study. They did not put that forward. They thought that they hardly had to do studies into anything. It's only recently that they've been required to do some studies into the vegetable industry. We've had local farmers who were approached by an independent consultant who were convinced that they should speak to the consultant about all their concerns and told that they would get the report from that consultant when after they'd put it to Kelbar. The farmers trusted the consultant, opened up about their concerns, and were told afterwards that they weren't going to be given that report. They were going to be given a sanitised fact sheet or something down the track. Now, there's been no reason for our community to have any trust in the process. Every time we turn around, we're seeing things that have items missing, like I mentioned the noise report before, where they're just talking about trucks going along the road and they're trying to say that the noise in Lindenow is actually louder than Bobby Davidson's place, which is right next to the mine, is one of the quietest places you can find. To explain that, they said, well, we do different averaging for the noise in Lindenow as opposed to Bobby's place. There is nothing straightforward about it. In terms of the matter in the mine, we know that there's at least 4 lots of toxic materials in there. We also know when Kelbar are turning around and saying that there's nothing to see here, nothing to worry about, all the levels are quite fine, they're actually not using the correct standards. They're using residential soil standards, which would be fine if they're doing a housing development. They are not. They are digging up land and they are going to be spreading airborne matter over our community. They have not looked at the proper air quality standards or the US EPA ones. They're relying on people who are sitting in on the EES process not understanding all the technical problems associated with it. Every one of the people on the technical reference group goes in with the best intentions, but they don't know what they don't know. Our community has done masses of investigation into this stuff. We know what we're on about. That's why we've started doing baseline studies. So, but we shouldn't have to be doing this by ourselves. This is costing us a fortune. The government is not supporting the community to do any of this. The proponent is being supported all the way through, hundreds of thousands of dollars putting into them. We have spent countless thousands of hours trying to find out what's going on with this process. We shouldn't be asked to do it. We should be getting support from council to do it. We don't know what's in those soils apart from what's in CalBAR's public documents. And that's what we've based our stuff on with our heavy metals expert.
Thanks, Ms Eastman. I'll have to ask you to finish there. Thank you. Miss Debbie Carruthers.
Thank you. We know about the substantial flaws with the EES process, so we can rightly be angered and concerned when we're told to wait and have trust in that process. I emailed a copy of the Auditor General's report on the EES to Councillor Peltz over a month ago, and she kindly took the initiative to email this to the other councillors, so you should be familiar with those flaws. The reality is it is most unlikely, as we've heard, that the EES process will stop this mine from going ahead, even though there are significant environmental problems due to the hazardous and highly toxic nature of the substances involved, as well as the inappropriate location for this mine. Very importantly, we've heard again, the Minister for Planning can totally ignore what the EES says and give his approval for the mine to proceed regardless. According to the Auditor General, only 2 to 3 projects in Victoria each year are subject to an EES process. So this reinforces the highly environmentally sensitive nature of this mine. His report says, and I quote, "The EES assessment aims to find ways to reduce negative impacts and to shape projects to suit the local environment." Well, I ask you, that defies belief that this could be achieved with this project. The fact that this mine is being considered at all at this location really beggars belief. The parliamentary inquiry found the EES process not to be meeting its objectives and stated these problems: the non-binding nature of the Minister for Planning's recommendations and conditions imposed through the EES, barriers to public participation, it's not a transparent process, the need for more robust monitoring and auditing arrangements. Here are some facts that might not be known about the Technical Reference Group, the TRG that oversights the EES process. All of the consultants who submit reports on a range of studies are sourced and financed by CalBAR. No independent studies are presented to the TRG. There is no local community representative who knows the area. There is a council staff member. The EES is due to be submitted to the Minister in February. No final conclusions have been provided to the community about any of the studies. The community still doesn't know, as Joanne said, what's the analysis of the ore body, including the toxins, the transport route for the 80 B-double trucks that will be travelling on our rural roads daily, the source of the 3 to 4 gigalitres or more of water the mine will require annually. Neither the air quality nor the horticultural study reports have been released yet, and February is just around the corner, and the list goes on. So as Councillor Reeves states in his motion, the public had the opportunity to comment on the draft scoping requirements. But what he failed to mention, most importantly, is that after public submissions closed on the draft scoping document, CalBAR announced what it referred to as its refinements, which were in fact major changes to the project, which saw, to name a few, the size of the mining project increasing from 1,440 to 1,675 hectares, a second mining unit plant being added to further refine the heavy mineral concentrate on site, major roads realigned so that the historically significant fingerboards that we've heard about tonight from the Aboriginal community won't exist. Other roads are to be closed and new roads created through people's properties without any consultation, and a wet processing plant has been relocated closer to homes. The community requested these changes be included in the draft scoping documents and that we be given an opportunity of reply. However, the Minister for Planning stated the public would have to wait until the EES document was finished and available for public submissions during that 30-day response period to be able to question those refinements made by CalBAR. If the council doesn't take a position to oppose the mine now and ignore this counter motion by Councillor Reeves, then the opportunity to let the Premier and the ministerial decision makers know our views could be lost, and we'll just be told that the mine will be going ahead. A number of you, including Councillor Reeves, were councillors at the time the unanimous decision was made to ban fracking at the Shire. No one suggested that a legal opinion was needed to take action at that time. How can you ask the community to wait for the EES process to finish when you know all these problems exist and the likely outcomes? So let's hope the council doesn't find itself in the same situation as the City of Horsham with unexpected liabilities that have been talked about tonight, and that our ratepayer money doesn't have to be spent on resolving legal battles with a mineral sands mining company over what now has become a toxic waste dump left behind by Iluka, or when people stop buying veggies because of real or perceived fear of contamination.
Thank you, Ms. Carruthers.
To visit our lakes. Many more jobs will be lost than what the
Thank you. Marianne, you've got some advice.
I would preface my advice by saying that obviously it was sought quickly and obviously it would have been ideal to have more time. However, I have been fortunate enough to be able to contact a senior counsel at Council's legal services provider who has confirmed my interpretation, which is that the notice is valid and therefore can be considered and debated, and I'm happy to explain the rationale for that if required.
Yes, please.
As I understand it, there were 2 points at issue, one of which was turned on whether or not this is the motion proposed by Councillor Roberts. So the amendment is that the motion proposed by Councillor Roberts. The answer is yes. Even though it was amended, it is still the motion as proposed by Councillor Roberts. And the second part of the equation was whether motion is the same as resolution. So in the context that hold any such motion in abeyance. My view on that is that in all matters legal, context is king, and it has been confirmed by the senior counsel I spoke to that the intent of the motion is clear and that the words, while not interchangeable, are similar enough that the context is still clear.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. I'll carry on with the speakers. Ms. Louise Crisp.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and councillors and everyone else. A lot's been talked about the EES process tonight, and that is why I wanted to address my comments to Councillor Reeves' motion. I think the clearest thing is, what is the point of waiting for the EES? And there's been a number of speakers already mention the drawbacks, but what I'd like to talk about is actually the experience of one 4 years ago, the Stockman mine at Benambra. There is no mining without severe environmental consequences, and we might as well, be dead if we think any different. And what happens is long-term detrimental social and economic impacts. That impact will be felt by Tambo Valley residents forever, and potentially the Gippsland lakes as well. The original Benambra copper and zinc mine on the headwaters of the Tambo River operated between 92 and 96. It underwent an EES. However, the tailings dam, which was constructed at the site, was not at the site identified in the original EES. That tailings dam is constructed across the headwaters of the Tambo River on Straight Creek. It is literally a 20-metre high earthen dam across a riverway on springs. So how's that for planning? Significant changes can occur between the EES approval and the project delivery. And as people have mentioned already, the work plan changes without any community consultation at all. When Denhurst went into receivership, the company that was running the Benambra mine, they walked away from the site and left a disastrous intergenerational environmental legacy. a tailings dam containing 700,000 tonnes of highly acidic, heavy metal, toxic tailings leaking into Straight Creek and the downstream environment. That dam was at risk of breaching because it was constructed without a spillway, despite the EES. Thus, between 1999 and 2005, the EPA had authorised emergency discharges from the tailings dam of 300 megalitres of contaminated water into Straight Creek and the Tambo. When DPI undertook rehabilitation of the dam and the mine site at a cost of $7 million to the taxpayer, the EPA authorised emergency discharges with limits for zinc at 20 times higher than the ANZAC freshwater limits. Yet this was exceeded to such an extent that releases had to be halted a number of times, with zinc levels almost 800 times higher than the objective. This is what you get with an EES and with an EPA oversighting it. Where are the regulatory authorities? That dam is still leaking at approximately 86,000 litres of contaminated water a day. That is in the Stockman 2014 EES. Water samples collected from below the dam wall at a site visit in February 2018, assessed independently by EnviroLab in Melbourne, were found to have zinc levels 12 to 21 times higher than ANZAC freshwater guidelines, and copper at 9 to 50 times higher. There has never, by any of the government authorities, been an assessment of the net flux or the cumulative impact of all this heavy metal contamination on the Tambo River and the downstream environment. And Swifts Creek town takes its water supply off less than 30 kilometres downstream. And then, of course, it flows into the Gippsland lakes. So then we had another EES in 2014 by Independence Group to expand that tailings dam at exactly the same site, despite there having been an exemption imposed over it after it was rehabilitated in 2006. The proposal is to raise that dam wall 45 metres above the valley. It will be built on the old tailings dam, which secures the containment of that toxic tailings with a plastic geomembrane liner with an average lifespan of potentially only 30 years and a concrete grout curtain in a highly acidic environment that will destruct within 2 years, if you're lucky, 80. This is what we're building that major dam on, and that got an EES approval in 2014. Not only that, when the dam was rehabilitated in 2006, I have on a good source a person who was involved in actually the rehab project. There was a repository formed in the dam wall that contains potentially acid-forming rock and mine waste. It was buried in a specially constructed repository. That should have been taken off-site, and yet the regulatory authorities allowed that to go ahead.
Thank you, Ms Crisp.
That's what you get with an EES.
Mr Victor Hugo. Oh, it's got on here that you wanted to speak to that. Okay, thank you. Lastly was George Neophytou. Ms Wagner, did you want to speak?
Madam Mayor, I would just be repeating what I've already read out, so I think that I'll just highlight a couple of things here. Is that the real issue and focus here is council can have a political view on the subject mine and whether it should exercise it. The motion, I won't read that one out. We are lucky to have a diverse council with considerable experience and local knowledge who are capable of deciding whether a project is appropriate given competing existing uses of land. The primary issue with this mining project is there is a long-term, extremely viable use of this land, and one use cannot live next to the other use, and no environmental management considerations can consider this. I consider council should have been expressing its opinion from the start and even sought the responsible minister's intervention to overturn the project in this dominant agricultural area. I reiterate it is within Council's purview to take a position on the mine without requiring legal advice. As with all decisions by councillors, not everyone may agree or like the outcome, but as the executive and civic leaders, you need to take a course for the overriding benefit of everyone and the ratepayers in the Shire as your charter defines. A refusal of this notice of motion does not bar you from participation in all the steps open in the environmental effects statement process or in any points listed in Councillor Reeves' rationale.
Thank you, Ms Wagner. So item 2.2, notice of motion number 4, 2018, Councillor Roberts' notice of motion be held in abeyance until legal advice is sought. Is there a mover? No. Okay. The motion lapses. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Item 1.8 is a record of assemblies of councillors.
Madam Mayor, do you want me to suspend standing orders so if the people want to leave from the gallery, we'll have a 5-minute break? We've been going for 2.5 hours. And if they want to leave and not stand for the rest of the meeting, that would be fine. 5-minute break?
Sure. Thanks, Councillor Peltz. Back in at 8:35. Councillors, can I get a vote, please? All those in favour of suspending standing orders? Councillor Rattino. All those in favour?
Madam Mayor, you don't need to put a standing orders to just adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes.
Oh.
Just to help you there, not